I think that when you judge a parent, it's a pretty incriminating fact if they have a bunch of kids and all the kids hate them. You
Yes.
think about the things that can be telling about someone's character.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by Tucker Allen. Here's attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. Today we're picking up with part 2 of our discussion of the life of Jerry Lewis. So join us as we pick up now from where we left off in the last show. It was surprising to a lot of people that he could sing, because a lot of people didn't know that. But I do think that the consensus in the industry at the time they broke up, interestingly, was that Dean would struggle. In other words, Jerry had so dominated this partnership and dominated the promotional efforts that he was even mentioned primarily in articles about the two. So Dean was regarded as this talented guy, but he was the straight man, and it was Jerry who was regarded as the comedic genius. And it's funny how things turned out for the two of them. But at the time, the consensus among experts would have been that Jerry would have done well, and that Dean could do okay. I mean, he could do okay in a movie. He wasn't an Academy Award-winning actor, but he could do okay in a movie. We knew that, and we knew he could sing. But in terms of genius, the sort of success that the two had together, many people thought it was due 85-90% to Jerry Lewis. So when they split up, it's true that Jerry wasn't sure. It's going to be very challenging for him to start out as a solo act more than for Dean. Dean was solo by nature. He's this John Wayne type figure, so he was comfortable being by himself. But there was some uncertainty on Jerry's part. But it's funny how time, sometimes doesn't result in what you think it will be someday. And so Jerry did. He had a hit or two, whatever, maybe it's a couple hits, I guess. And so he did a couple albums, and then he gets a movie contract. So for 4 or 5 movies, which he did. Among them was Disorderly, Orderly, and what were some of the other ones?
Disorderly, Orderly, and The Bellboy was one of them too.
Oh yeah, The Bellboy. I remember that one.
And then what was another one? The Errand Boy. That was another one.
Yeah. So some of you all saw some of those movies. Always good. So meanwhile, Dean Martin goes on and he has this relationship with Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra knew both of them, both Dean and Jerry, but he didn't connect very much with Jerry. He connected with Dean. Frank Sinatra always kind of looked up to Dean. He thought Dean was really cool. So they would hang out, and they end up doing a series of movies together, all of which did well. I mean, their movies, Ocean's 11 and various other movies that they did very well. And again, Dean Martin could act, and he did do some serious roles. And he was pretty reliable for studios to hire to play a character in a movie, because they knew that he could always be counted on. He was solid. He had a certain following. The public loved him. He had this great charisma on screen. And Jerry Lewis never had that charisma, and he never did have this, to my knowledge, loyal following. If you look at his career afterwards, you can point to some successes for sure, and he got some honors, and he taught film school, and he was a smart guy for sure, but he didn't have the career. He didn't get a primetime television show. For how many years did the Dean Martin show go on?
For a while, yeah.
I mean, for at least 4 or 5 years, didn't it?
5, I believe, yeah.
Justin, can you look that up? So yeah, I mean, he was just Dean Martin. You could imagine hosting a show forever. He had this Johnny Carson-like quality. Johnny Carson, everybody felt comfortable with. He was cool, And Dean Martin was that too. And his show, I know, went on for years. And he had every major star came on his show as an act.
It's actually 8.
8 years?
65 to 73.
Yeah, I didn't know it lasted that long. So 8 years as a primetime television show host. So he was very good at what he did. In the meantime, he was doing movies. He was performing. So oddly enough, Dean turns out to have the far more successful career than Jerry. And I have to say that I find Dean much more likable. I'm curious what our audience would say. Give us your thoughts. But let's pick up then. So Jerry was having some early successes after they broke up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so he was having some early successes, and then he did the whole singing thing. He did really well at that, and then he kind of went back to movies, like we were just talking about, and he directed a lot, but his biggest one was The Nutty Professor. I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with that one.
That was
and then
huge.
he actually did have a cameo in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. So he would have been in that with Mickey Rooney, actually.
Maybe they compared notes.
They probably did, probably. But he kept going with Paramount for a while, and then in 1966 he left Paramount. And then he kind of just continued to make, television appearances from there. He did have, when he was with Paramount, he did host the Jerry Lewis Show, which was like a 13-week-long show. And it aired, I believe, in 1963 towards the end of it.
Yeah, and that was on, what was that? Was that ABC?
I believe it was ABC. Yeah.
So it's 13 weeks. So, he took a shot at having a show.
Everything you build for you and your family deserves protecting. All of those important assets you have worked so hard to acquire and enjoy, you want to make sure they're handled with care. At Tucker Allen, our attorneys will customize an estate plan that will work for you and your family's goals and needs. Tucker Allen, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. Visit tuckerallen.com.
But no one is surprised that did not succeed.
It didn't go very well. And I was listening to some documentaries earlier in the day today about him and just that show, and how all the guests were very uncomfortable, especially the women.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, he wasn't that great of a guy when it came to that stuff. So
Well, he definitely doesn't have the charm of Dean, in my opinion, but
no.
But what's interesting is his marriage. He was only, to this, we got to give him credit for this, given all the people we talk about in this show, how unusual it is to have these long marriages. So he did have a marriage for 34, 36 years, his first marriage.
Yeah, it was from 1944 to 1980.
So, and that's just amazing to have.
Yeah.
In Hollywood, it just doesn't happen. And then after that, he remarried almost immediately after the divorce.
Yeah. And the second one was still it was 34 years long.
So this kind of sets the stage for us to talk about problems that developed in this blended family, which ultimately produced a lot of bad feelings in the end. And then we'll talk about the estate situation. So how many children did he have in his first marriage?
So he had 6 sons, and that was with his first wife, Patty Palmer, who we just talked about. They were married from 1944 to 1980. She was a professional singer, and he did actually have affairs during their marriage. His biggest one was Marilyn Monroe, and there was all kinds of headlines about that. But the names of his children were Gary, Ronald, Scott, Christopher, Anthony, and Joseph. And as we'll kind of go on to see, Gary, which was his eldest son, he was a very notable critic for his father. He did not like his father. He thought he was a really mean and evil person. When the youngest son died, Joseph, from an overdose, Gary blamed his father and said that it was his fault, and publicly blamed him for that death as well. But Patty and him obviously split up, and then pretty soon after he got married to Sandy Pitnick.
I mean,
And she was,
just literally a month or two later. Yeah.
yeah, just a month or two later, which was pretty crazy. And they were married all the way up until his death in 2017. And she was a professional dancer, and they had an adopted daughter named Danielle as well.
Which they adopted as an infant.
Yes, that's correct.
So Dean would have been like 66 years old, and his wife was much younger. She was 27 when they married. So, and he would have been, what, 50-something?
Yeah, he would have been, 50-ish.
Yeah,
50.
so there a big age difference. And a little bit of background here, and to understand why the boys, the children of the first marriage, felt some resentment was, their mother, they'd been together all these years, and I'm sure they knew about their dad's infidelities, but they thought that their dad was going to stay with their mom. And probably that was Jerry's intention, was to continue this marriage where he kind of did what he wanted to do, but he still came home to his first wife. And then he meets this woman in Las Vegas. I don't know if she was a showgirl. That sounds too stereotypical, but she was a performer. She was a performer, and he met her while he was there performing, and they struck up this relationship that very quickly, became much more than that. So that's when he decides he's going to divorce his wife and marry this much younger person, and then they try to have kids, and they have trouble having kids. So they decide to adopt. And by the time they adopt, Jerry, it's maybe 10 years later into their marriage, or little less probably, but they'd been married quite a while. And they decide to adopt, and they adopt this as an infant, this girl. And suddenly Dean goes from being this very, very absent dad, which I think all the kids pretty much agree that was the case. He was gone all the time and building his career, and we know he was during those years we've been talking about when these kids were young. So he was there very little, and mom did the parenting, and then the kids grow up, and so they've had this rocky relationship with dad in their adulthood anyway. But then I think probably the problem was relating to this woman. But I think that when you judge a parent, it's a pretty incriminating fact if they have a bunch of kids and all the kids hate them. You
Yes.
think about the things that can be telling about someone's character, or their priorities, is if look, anybody can have a child that hates them for some strange reason. You can't control that always as a parent. But when you have 6 kids and none are willing to sing your praises, that's not a good sign. And now, while there was some repair and some patchwork done, and Gary, the oldest, I think it was Gary the oldest, he was the one who was successful with Gary and the Playboys. Some people may have heard of Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Well, that's actually Jerry's son. Anyway, so Gary ended up, though, patching things up somewhat with his dad. I mean, it was never the sort of father-son relationship that any of us would hope for who have sons, but it was where he was prepared to say, "Look, my dad and I are good. He's a good guy, and our relationship is fine." But then they'll read again where he's suddenly calling his dad bad and evil. I think may have been a word he actually used. So suddenly Gary, who had somewhat restored his relationship with his dad, then you'll find statements made after Joseph died, which he died in 1909.
09. Yeah, sorry.
Was it 09?
Yes, it was 09. I was sitting there, I was like, wait a minute, that's after.
So anyway, so it's confusing. You may think, well, how do you reconcile this? Well, that's what had happened. There was this period in which there was détente of sorts between them, and then a period when things just fell back apart and it was worse than ever. So one thing that is really telling is estate planning, which we'll come to in a second. One other factor that I think really rubbed the kids wrong, the boys from the first marriage, was apparently Jerry made this this commitment to himself, and which he disclosed to the world, that I'm going to be a super parent this time. I wasn't the first time, but I'm going to be this time. So this girl becomes the apple of his eye. I mean, he's hands-on raising her. I mean, feeding her, taking care of her when she was an infant, taking her with him when he went to concerts, he and his wife too, but taking his daughter with him to events and eventually making her a sort of manager for him as she got into her later teens. Remember, she would have been young when he died because she was born in 84 or so, something in there, 84. So the child would have been very young when he died in 17. So that you look at this day and night contrast between parenting with the boys and the girl, and the boys are watching this. And so on the one hand, they're grieving and resentful regarding their mother and what she's had to suffer through and for, and then to be left. And now they're watching him be this super parent. And he called himself a super dad as to the second marriage. So yeah, that would not tend to enhance your relationship with your kids unless you did it in conjunction with a sort of mea culpa, where you come to the kids and you just abjectly apologize and say, look, I know I was not good at what I did. I can't go back and correct it, but I'm going to do for you and be with you and be the dad I can be now for you. And in addition, I'm going to be a better dad for this adoptive daughter. If it had been inclusive like that, then there's a good chance that there wouldn't have been that resentment on the part of the boys. But I do think it's really telling about this guy's personality. And then the final coup de grace is whenever he decides to make a will in which he very explicitly disinherits all of his sons. So do you want to say anything more leading up to that part of it? Is there anything I'm leaving out that we're going to cover?
No, not really a ton. I think you covered most of that. They just had that tumultuous relationship. And like you said, yeah, that final nail in the coffin was just when he did his will in 2012, and he just decided to disinherit everybody besides his adopted daughter and his second wife. And I read a lot about what his sons had to say about that. And they were not happy. And they were just saying, he was just a horrible dad all the way around the whole entire time.
Yeah. And so to explicitly disinherit your sons, for them all to be bad, which is what that implies. It implies that they're all bad. To disinherit one son, to disinherit two sons, maybe 3 of your 6 children, but to say that all of them are bad, which he was implicitly saying when you expressly disinherit. He didn't just not mention them. He stated that he's explicitly disinheriting his children. And this is a will, which is a public document, so I think he wanted the world to know that. He wanted them to know that he did it very deliberately. And he did this not on the eve of his death, in which he's the victim of, this overwhelming influence of somebody around him, of the evil stepmother. And it's hard to blame this on her, because, at least directly on her, because he did this in 2012 when he prepared this will. He dies in 17. So, he was clear-headed at that point. He had lots of time to think about and reconsider whether that was the right thing to do. Obviously, he had no second thoughts or regrets about that thereafter. So one concern I would have about doing something like that is, at least in terms of my record, my public record, is that I think it always says more about the dad than it says about the sons. And what it says about the dad is not flattering. So here he is, a bad dad, and the kids turn out resenting him. He agrees he's a bad dad. He won't argue that. And then the kids end up resenting him, and he gets mad because they're not respectful to him, and they don't seem to like him, and they say bad things about him in their adulthood, and so he disinherits them. There's something really, but let's not forget the theme of the show. The theme of the show is about how stepmothers come in and not so much intentionally. It could be an angelic stepmother, and sometimes it literally is the mother who tries every way she can to sort of repair the damage that resulted from her replacing the first wife, and whether it was a divorce or a death or whatever it was. And so you can have the stepmom being entirely having clean hands in this messy situation, but not always. And in this case, we have reason to suspect that there were disagreements with her. I didn't read anything that really painted her as a particularly culpable person, but nothing incidentally that indicated any effort on her part to repair the damage either. You look for, often you'll find when you do research for stories like this, you'll find a friend of a family member in perhaps one of the books that have been written. And we don't look at them all, obviously, for this show. We'll look at some. Or you'll see an article that's written, or you'll come across in your search in the web, you'll find something that will suggest one thing or another that will create a different perspective regarding a split between two people or an altercation where you kind of get a different perspective. But other times you see nothing inconsistent with the main theme or the public presumption. And in this case, I think that the kids didn't like her and she didn't like the boys. And I think that we have to assume that she didn't do anything to rebuild that relationship. Encourage Jerry to rebuild the relationship. But there's no evidence of that. No one has said that. The boys don't say, well, it's really Dad more than her. And it could be. I mean, really, Dad, there's a lot of reasons to believe that Jerry was not a nice guy. And it goes beyond the things we talked about in this show. And I don't want to make this show unduly long, but those who have followed his career and have seen him do interviews and stuff, you just sense this side of him that he probably wasn't a very likable person, actually. But anyway, so he ends up creating this will. The boys could have challenged the will because there was no contest clause, and the reason you can't have a no contest clause in this situation is they're not getting anything. There's no disincentive for them to challenge the will, but there was some early disagreements after his death, but they didn't relate to the validity of the will. The will had been in effect for a long time. Jerry's feelings were publicly known. Everyone knew it. So really the stage was not set for a will fight, and I think Jerry knew that, and he could safely do what he did. His estate was valued at approximately $50 million, but what we see consistently in these numbers is that they fail to give adequate value to the intellectual property that is yet to come. And Jerry's name, believe it or not, has continued to live with some renown in the field of filmmaking. He taught a lot on how to make films. He never made a film for which he got an Academy Award or the sort of things you normally think of people who have that reputation. But he dedicated a lot of time to working with film students, and he was a teacher at heart. He liked to teach. Some would say pontificate, but he liked to help others. And so he has had a continuing reputation. His movies, he probably doesn't have much in the way of residuals from his movies, given the contracts they would have had to sign back then as actors. But $50 million at least, and maybe 60 or so. And then this would have been in 2017's numbers. It's a significant amount. In terms of criticisms, if there were additional assets that passed by way of an irrevocable trust, we may not know about that. Some say, well, why did he use a will versus a revocable trust? Well, we don't know the reasons for that. It might be that he was simply indifferent to the fact that that would be public. I don't think he cared. I think he probably preferred that the world know what his thoughts were in terms of the important people in his life. I think it was a statement, not only to his kids, but to the world. And I also think, though, that from the standpoint of tax planning, which he could have done and he would have had to have done over time, and it's possible, again, that there's an irrevocable trust. And the beauty of it is We don't know about it if it was created. And that's one of the advantages to people who are doing estate planning. We wouldn't know if you had created an asset, put $20, $30 million into it, and it's sitting somewhere else and it's unaffected by his death, meaning, a trust doesn't go through probate. So it would just continue on. It's like creating a corporation and you die. It doesn't mean the corporation stops working. It continues on undisturbed. So in this case, I think the reason he might not have done the sort of tax planning is that he might have only cared about the tax impact through the life of his wife, meaning he wanted to be sure that there were assets for her, and then he knew that even after taxation, there would be enough left for his daughter. And so the way that the law works is no matter how much money, there's this unlimited exemption for a spouse. So you could have $100 million and a guy dies, he's married, he leaves it to his wife. So that wife can avoid taxation for the balance of her life. So you get to postpone the tax man, and they come at the death of the second to die of a married couple. So he might have been thinking that I'm not going to take these tax planning steps because I really only I have one daughter who there'll be enough left for her when my wife dies. And I really want to be sure that my wife's lifestyle is not impacted in any way, that she has plenty of money, and I know she will because she won't get hit by tax when I die, and it'll all be due when she dies. And then even when it is paid, I have one heir. I have a single individual versus, say, 5 kids or more. And so I know that even after the 40% tax is paid, that still there'll be plenty left for her. Plus, it gives my wife the ability to make any changes in distribution that she wants to make based on what's happened with my daughter between my death and the death of my wife. So it was a very simple estate plan. And this, oddly enough, unlike some of the cases we talk about when we talk about family conflict, this did not result in litigation. But it's not a role model for how we would want to handle this situation. Here we've done two subjects in a row. Neither of them have I cared much for.
I know. That's awesome.
I don't know if I'm becoming a bit curmudgeonly in my old age. Justin, you would eliminate that possibility, wouldn't you?
Definitely.
Okay. You can see he's well paid. He's due for a review in 6 months, so. Anyway, maybe next week it'll be somebody that we can really get excited about. We've done so many of whom I'm huge fans. Frank Sinatra. Those of you who complain that show went too long, believe me, it's probably a third as long as it would have been if others around me hadn't constrained me from talking more about Frank Sinatra. So there's lots of people we do that I love to talk about and I admire and can say wonderful things about unendingly. But these two, no. No. We should do, have we done Dean Martin?
I don't think we have yet.
No.
That would be interesting to do.
Now, that would be. This is a sad story, though, the death of Dino, his son that he was so proud of. But maybe we will do Dean Martin. I don't know if that would fall into our series here, which is focusing on conflicts or potential conflicts between stepmom and kids.
Yeah, we have to see if it fits the criteria. But we can bank that one for later, though.
Yeah. All right. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. I hope this was informative and entertaining to you. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement. Sponsored by Tucker Allen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit tuckerallen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.